Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alastair.
And today we are talking about the new Stephen King adaptation, It, and then we'll be discussing the side issue of Are Clowns Still Scary in 2017? Because yes, this is the first episode of our amazing new format in which we do this, whereas we have a thing and then we have a related topic. Yeah, we just thought we'd mix things up a bit after 45 episodes, see if we can give ourselves the chance to take discussions a bit broader than just reviewing stuff. You know, if it doesn't work, we'll do something else. But yep, for now, we're giving this a go. I did sort of consider whether we should restart the numbering and do season 2 or something, but it seems a shame to zero out the numbering this close to the big 5-0.
I think it's still a continuation of the previous brand. It's just a kind of a slight variation.
Yeah, we're the same in spirit, guys. We're just going to be a bit shorter and slightly less review-focused. One thing I did want to mention before we actually get into it is that, yes, I feel it would be disingenuous not to tip a hat to the Kraken podcast, who used a somewhat similar format, and I cannot pretend that our shift to this format isn't at least partly because we both loved the Kraken podcast. But we're doing something slightly different, but still I wanted to give them a shout. So yeah, if you want a good discussion podcast, more along the veins of politics and general culture stuff than strict reviewing, the Kraken podcast sadly is no longer going, as of this recording, which is a shame, as I think it was one of the better men talk about things podcasts out there. But if you want some good discussions, you could do a lot worse than dive on into their archives. And yeah, with that out the way, we're going to move on to one thing that is very much the same. Alastair, what have you been consuming since the last episode?
Well, I've gone back and I've been reading more of something that you recommended to me in the recommendations section. And in that, I've been reading Kieran Gillen's comic Uber.
Oh, excellent.
We reviewed it sometime last year. I forget exactly when. And I really liked it. I think in my wrap-up of 2016, I said it was like my favourite thing that you had recommended to me. It's a sort of alternative history comic set just at the end of World War II when the Nazis uncover a technology for enhancing humans or creating Ubers, sort of, people who are stronger and with sort of some, I guess you could call them superpowers. And then how that changes the war, and then the Allies get hold of the technology, and then later the Soviets and the Japanese as well. And then it kind of traces this alternative history through the war. And it's very, very interesting and very well written.
Yeah, no, I was a big fan of Uber. I read the first 30 or so issues quite a while ago. But yeah, I mean, to say it's like World War II with superheroes, I think kind of makes it sound like it's going to be a bit, I don't know, superficial and silly. But it's surprisingly dense. Kieran Gillen has clearly done an absolute fuck ton of research. It's clear he's clearly put a lot of thought into exactly how this might work and what the implications would be. The obvious short-term implications being, as you said, that there's a bit of a sort of superhuman arms race between the various powers. But where that's going to go next, I don't know. I'm curious what his final sort of extrapolation from all this will be.
Yeah, I mean, the level of research he's got into is really impressive. There's, he weaves in real people from history, Churchill, Alan Turing, Hitler, Goebbels, other people. There's that, and also he brings in lots of real-life battles from the war or, sort of ships and events. But there's loads of other little things, like he's done loads of research into like logistics and things like that, and how these new Ubers would be combined with like existing military technology and how it would work together, and like kind of just how they would influence things like supply chains or the problem of not only taking land but holding it against counterattacks and things. So there must be a lot of detailed research that's gone into writing this, and you can really tell in the quality of the writing that it's very, very believable. The premise obviously is quite fantastical, but the whole thing is just really well grounded in reality. And obviously the whole thing works through this metaphor of, as you say, like an arms race, but instead of it being about nukes, it's based around Ubers.
I think it's pretty safe to describe it as an arms race because the Ubers do have arms.
Yes.
Admittedly, not all of those arms stay attached the whole time, but they do have them.
No, yeah, and that's the other thing, I guess. The art is really well done. The various people who draw the comics are incredibly talented, but it is quite gory.
Yeah, the other aspect of Kieran Gillen's vision of what would happen with superheroes is, therefore answering the ultimate question of what would actually happen if Superman hit someone, particularly a non-super someone. And the answer is, well, splat, to cut it short.
Yeah, exactly. And also there's other things involving experiments in creating the Ubers that go wrong or have unpleasant side effects, and that's all very sort of disgustingly realised. Yeah, it's very visceral. I suppose it's like, again, this is part of the metaphor that this is about war, and it's, you know, it's bloody and it's unpleasant, and it's not sanitised in any way, which is one of the other reasons why I like this comic.
It is good. I don't think it's been quite as big a sort of mainstream hit as some of Kieran Gillen's other stuff, like The Wicked and the Divine, which is a sort of maybe a slightly more big poppy melodrama. But if you like the idea of a sort of gritty alternate history, I think Uber is doing a very thorough job.
Cool. Well, that's what I've been up to. Nick, what have you been doing since we last spoke?
Might be alarmingly close to a podcast first. I've actually been reading some non-fiction.
Oh.
Yeah, I've read a book which I didn't like very much, and I don't think it's particularly helpful to say what it was, but I didn't like it very much. And I sort of thought, actually, maybe I'm a bit burnt out with stories and the cliches of stories or something, so I'll read a non-fiction book. So I decided, in an act of moderate non-imagination, to read *Sapiens*, the popular science book. Popular science? Oh, Nick, you're phrasing. Mm-hmm. It stuns me so. By Yuval Noah Harari. Well, *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*, which is basically Harari taking a sort of big, broad view on how humanity has developed from evolution, when we split off from other species of humans. Yeah, he differentiates between humans and Homo sapiens specifically, and goes forwards to, well, I haven't actually finished it yet, full disclosure, no spoilers please, but I'm assuming he's going to go through more or less to the modern age. And yeah, I can see why. It's the #1 popular science book on Amazon. It's pretty good. It's very enjoyably readable. It's got written in a nice chatty style and throws out the dinner party facts without needing to, get too dense or anything. So yeah, I don't know if I've discovered a new interest in science, or if I'm just enjoying this because it's particularly well written for the popular, non-interested person.
I do find for a lot of non-fiction, especially kind of stuff that's about science, or also it applies for things like history and stuff that are taking on kind of large subjects. If it's well written and in a kind of engaging way, that does help. If it's exploring a complex issue, but the guy knows how to write in an accessible way, that really does make it easier to read.
Yeah, but it's very broad strokes. His 3 chapters on why the human race has become so dominant, or how it's taken over the entire world, basically boiled down to empire, money and religion, and he just had 1 chapter of about 20 pages on each one, and then he moved on to something else. See, he's very much doing the big topics. So yeah, it teaches me some dinner party facts about the real world, rather than my usual dinner party conversation of topic, which is of course the Spider-Man clone saga. Yeah, did you know the reason human babies are born so underdeveloped is because our hips had to be narrowed in order for us to stand up and walk on 2 legs properly, which meant we couldn't just gestate them for so long, which is why other species' babies come out ready to face the world after impressively small amounts of time, whereas we're sad mewling infants for years.
I did not know that. That is interesting.
There you go. That is a thing I've learned from this book. Yeah, I get the feeling the author of this popular science book may not be overly woke, as he does put the boot into liberalism a tiny bit in a couple of places. Well, liberal humanism, to give it what he says is its full name, in which he basically says liberal humanism depends on ascribing inherent value to human beings. It becomes increasingly hard to pretend there is inherent value to human beings. Well, I thought we were ascribing value to human beings just because they are our species and we should all be nice to each other, rather than because we proved it scientifically. But
yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I think that when you get into these political debates based around science, there can be an element of science is throwing out the objective facts, but politics is so subjective and so much about competing subjective views of the world that claiming some kind of supreme objectivity that sits above it isn't always helpful, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is weird reading this book, which obviously, he is offering this grand swooping overview of the entire of human history, and a lot of the time it's easy to just go with him and going, yes, that probably is roughly what happens. And then if it's asked, you realize, oh no, you're actually just a person having an opinion. And there are parts of this I'm not entirely sure I agree with. So yeah, it's been an interesting reading experience. Who knows whether I'll try and find another popular science book to read or just go crawling back to novels, but it's been a fun diversion.
In this episode, we'll be reviewing the film adaptation of Stephen King's novel, It. This film is set during the 1980s in a small town in New England. It focuses on a group of school children during the summer holidays who discover there is something unpleasant and nasty that lives in the sewers of their town that sort of abducts and preys on children. This thing takes various different forms, including sort of most famously a sadistic murdering clown called Pennywise. Quite a lot of people who I know really rate the book, but we're going to be talking about the film. So, Nick, what did you think?
We're going to be talking about the film because neither of us have read the book. Yes, I knew very little going into it, lol. And was perhaps, based on its vague rep as the scary clown film, was perhaps expecting more of a horror film and less of a sort of horror-tinged adventure. Yeah, I felt a sense of threat at various times, but not that much pants-soiling terror. But having said all that, it is quite a fun little adventure. It does give a good sense of this place and this location. I quite like the vibe it sort of created, rather than this sort of the usual sense you get in horror films, but the weird thing is sort of slowly entering the location. There's just this sense that the whole location is soaking in it, you know. It doesn't show it at the very beginning and then it disappears till about 2/3 through the film, which often happens. It's just always sort of there. And yeah, I just quite like that as a style. I think it sets it apart from other horror films, even though I just said it isn't a horror film. It's almost as if I'm contradicting myself. It reminded me a bit of Stranger Things, possibly because it had one of the same kids in it, and also I think weirdly, yeah, this is a new film calling back to one of the things that Stranger Things is also calling back on. A style, a sort of coming-of-age Americana adventure/adventure horror thing that they're all sort of referencing in a way. But yeah, no, I quite enjoyed this. The 2.25 hours did go by quite smoothly for me.
Yeah, it's certainly well paced. It doesn't feel like as long as it is, and also it's quite a large book, and they've done a good job of chopping it down to what didn't feel like a sort of a rushed story. One of the ways they've achieved this is that the book has two plot lines running sort of concurrently through them. One about the childhood of the characters and one about the characters when they're grown up. And I think in this film they've just done the childhood section of the novel. Yeah, I agree with what you have to say, that I think although the film had a few good kind of jumps moments, there's I don't know, I don't want to spoil them. There's definitely a few scenes when the clown appears by surprise and it kind of catches you unawares, which is a kind of good accelerating kind of jump moment. There's definitely some very creepy bits, especially as the children venture down into the sewers. They do encounter quite a few quite creepy things. But I did feel the film really didn't have like sort of sustained tension. As soon as basically Pennywise or any of the other sort of fantastical predatory things associated with this creature called It were not on screen, the sense of tension kind of evaporated entirely. They go back into this town where it's set, and everything suddenly goes back to being really sort of wholesome and normal. And I get they're trying to do the whole darkness lurks beneath the surface in even the most wholesome American town. But I kind of felt that just kind of completely deflated the tension. If you, I don't know, say compare this to a film like, I don't know, The Neon Demon, which we reviewed last year, or The Witch, which have the whole film, it just has running through it this kind of note of unsettling tension. You never feel that the characters are particularly safe, even when the actual predatory or sort of like dangerous things aren't present. There's always something there harassing or threatening the characters, and you never feel that they're safe. Whereas in It, I felt as soon as the kids run out of the sewer, it's like, oh, they're back in the light, they're safe. Kind of the tension evaporates. I mean, even a film like Blair Witch did try to create that sustained sense of tension. The fact, while the people were in the forest, you felt they were always under threat when they were in the forest. I mean, the film just wasn't very good, but at least it did try to create that sense of sustained tension, which it didn't have.
Well, I think it was more about a sort of going on a little journey, a little coming-of-age story, some might say, with these specific characters, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't really about them going on one horrifying adventure. It was about, establishing their little group bond and then showing what they went through together. I mean, there was quite a few bits where the evil clown or general evil apparitions appeared and then they ran away from it, which did, after the first 20 or so repeats, start to make you think they're not going to get caught, are they? But yeah, I did quite like the way it sort of focused in on the characters and how they interacted and how they were bonding together. I liked that I got a good sense of their sort of little group dynamic. It did achieve this a bit by short shrifting a couple of them. I have no idea how much of this is the source material, but considering King's book is famously vast, I'm going to assume that the characters who got very little to do here, and there are a couple who get very noticeably are just there for a few bits, probably got more in the book. It's kind of a shame that one of them is the only black character in the group, but that's just the way it goes, I guess. I mean, as I say, I've not read the book. I gather a lot of Stephen King stuff is known for being kind of genre bending, but yeah, I suspect I've just decided not to evaluate this as a horror movie because, as you say, it's not really trying to create this sort of ongoing sense of claustrophobic fear, although it did do a decent job of that at the very end when they finally went into the sewers and it did become this sort of series of fearful encounters. Yeah,
I think one of the things that people say about Stephen King's books is that they are very good on characterization. that, he spends a lot of time building up and really convincing you of these characters. And I guess it's a large book, and even though they cut it in half, though they've cut it in half sort of horizontally rather than across. But even though, despite the fact that they've cut it in half, they have also still had to then ditch probably quite a lot of the characterization, because just to get it down to sort of 2 hours worth of story. So some of the characters, you're right, were quite broadly drawn. But other characters, there was like sort of a deeper dive into their home life and what they're like as a person. One of the things that the film did do very well, which is related to that, is the idea that sometimes the grown-ups are scarier than the monster itself, kind of just abusive and bullying grown-ups can almost be worse. I mean, there's a plot line, one of the main characters is sort of been, well, it's heavily implied that their father's sexually abusing them. There's another one when there's, I don't know if the mother is kind of convincing them they're sick all the time. I guess it's, is that Munchausen syndrome? Or is it Munchausen by proxy? I can't remember. But yeah, there's a whole thing with sort of abusive thing about one of their mothers is convincing them constantly that they're ill to kind of be an overprotective parent. And one of the others is recovering from a trauma of their younger brother dying. So they're bringing in that stuff that kind of, the adult world is sort of messier and scarier than even that kind of the supernatural horror thing. Those are kind of the bits I think when the film worked really well.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant. I guess I suspect this way works better if you take it as the story of these kids than the scariness of growing up into the adult world, rather than, an actual story about this terrifying monster stalking them. As we've said, this is famously only half the book, which does mean that a lot of deeper dives into the horror element, it feels like they might have been slightly thrown to the sequel, he says, having no idea what happens in the sequel. This one does end up feeling a bit, a clown turns up. They have a sort of a coming-of-age runaround while the clown chases them, and then the clown goes away again. I mean, if you wanted to be brutally harsh, and this isn't really my opinion, but if you wanted to be brutally harsh, you could say it feels like a movie-length version of the bit that would normally come before the credits to set up the rest. But I think by spacing it out to a whole film, they could probably have adapted it like that. I mean, but yeah, I do think that doing it at whole movie length and soaking in the vibe is something they've executed pretty well, as long as they actually get to make the second half, which, based on what I know of the box office success of this film, they probably will do. Then it'll be hopefully a good complete work in, I guess, a couple of years' time when the second one comes out.
I think you're right that it does work best when it's doing the kind of teenage coming-of-age story bits, which, there's a lot of other Stephen King adaptations that kind of hinge on this, like Stand By Me, for example. The film is good at capturing that kind of young people on the cusp of adulthood, or at least on the journey to adulthood, and they're starting to engage with the things that separate kind of adults from children other than just purely their age, like themes about they need to take responsibility for themselves and they need to solve their problems, not just run crying to a grown-up. The realization that the world is bigger than just you and what's around you, that there's other things going on, and also the realization that there's things are more important than what you're currently feeling in that moment. You can kind of have a sort of a bigger perspective. And as well as things like forging friendships and, exploring romance and things like that happen, as you sort of move into teenagehood or early adulthood. So the film does quite a good job of capturing that in a sort of maybe slightly rose-tinted, wasn't it lovely in the past, when everyone just rode around on bikes all the time having adventures. But they do capture that quite well.
I don't know, I feel like they did a decent job of pointing out that there's often some slightly grim realities behind that, considering nearly everyone's domestic life turned out to be miserable.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know, I possibly feel like we're giving Pennywise the dancing clown slightly short shrift here, the poor sad bastard. I feel like he Bill Skarsgård does do a good job of playing him in this sort of creepy, weirdly voiced way, and there are a few sequences especially where he's quite unsettling. There's quite a fun bit with a slide projector, which is quite a nice bit of regular thing, turns out to be horrible business. I enjoyed that quite a lot. Yeah,
that was probably one of the scarier parts of the film. That definitely had a sort of a good jump in there that caught me unawares.
And yeah, it does a good job of setting up this vague sort of clown balloon imagery, which sort of then lurks around them for the rest of the film and gives them a good shorthand. Oh, there's a balloon. Oh shit.
It's certainly very creepy. I just think in order to pass over into pants-wettingly scary, there needed to be like more of a sustained sense of tension.
Yeah, I do share the slight tangible disappointment that this famous horror story didn't, get under my skin and harrow me. But personally, I don't know if that's just slightly false expectations on my part. I liked what it was doing, even if it didn't terrify me. Based on the way the story was structured, it didn't feel like it was really trying to. Okay, and that was it. It was that. And now we move to our related point this week, which is, are clowns still scary in 2017? Clowns, of course, at this point, almost better known for being the bad guy or the murderer in things than they are for actually being, clowns. But does that just mean they've lost the element of surprise? Alastair, what do you think?
Well, I think clowns certainly are still scary in 2017. For example, chlorophobia, the fear of clowns, is the third most common fear in Britain.
Oh God, he's done research.
Yep. Quite a lot of people are quite scared of clowns, it turns out. I didn't quite realise how widespread the fear was until now. And there's something quite just unsettling and sort of grim about clowns, which we can go into in more detail. But there's lots of examples of scary clowns in our sort of contemporary pop culture. We've talked about It and Pennywise. The Joker, obviously, is a character with a enduring creepy legacy that people come back to again and again. There's this recent craze, although it seems to have died away a bit, of real-life scary clowns. Memes bleeding into reality, and they do sound pretty horrifying. So in 2017, we are still beset by fears of grim, smiling, face-painted, scary clowns.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, obviously, there are a lot of people who are scared of clowns, so it's hard for me to really take the aggressive, they're not scary, I actually still find them cute and funny angle, because fun it would be to just pretend in the name of, devil's advocacy, People who play devil's advocate seem to get quite a bad rap in 2017. But to be honest, I think people hate aggressive devil's advocate debaters more than they hate clowns.
Maybe that's the number 2 fear in Britain.
Number 3, clowns. Number 2, people popping up and going, actually, just to play devil's advocate. And number 1, Brexit. So, yeah, I mean, the thing is, clowns, as I sort of hinted earlier, at this point, I'm pretty sure clowns are more well known for being terrifying than they are for actually being clowns. Maybe it's just me as a pop culture observer rather than someone who ever goes to the circus. But at this point, if I see a clown, my first thought is almost certainly stabbing fear rather than of comical lols. I mean, if I was going to argue against it, my biggest point would be, I feel like we're sort of following vaguely up on some of the themes of our discussion, some of the vague tone of our discussion of It. Clowns are still scary in the sense that they're obviously a threat, but they don't really have the horror factor anymore, do they? It's not really, a clown will no longer surprise you if it turns out to be a serial murderer, because at this point, after, as you say, Pennywise, the Joker, the epidemic of actual clowns running at people with knives last year, at this point, it would always be more of a surprise if a clown didn't try and kill you.
Yeah, I guess there is definitely an element of that. If you give anyone a knife and they run at you, they're going to be scary, regardless of whether they're dressed as a clown or a ballerina or just wearing, a suit and tie.
If even a university-friendly presence such as Richard Whiteley ran at me with a knife, is Richard Whiteley dead? Is that a distasteful reference?
Yeah, Richard Whiteley is pretty dead.
Richard Whiteley... At this point in Richard Whiteley's career, if Richard Whiteley ran at me at all, I would be somewhat worried.
Yeah, that's definitely zombie Richard Whiteley, yeah.
If, I don't know, Superman existed and ran at me with a knife, I would still fear him.
Yeah, I think there's something that's quite grim about clowns just in themselves. Not whether they're running at you with knives or not, just the kind of concept of a clown. There's something a bit unsettling about them. I think it's the fact that their face is sort of hidden behind a mask of makeup. The smile is sort of painted on, which means it's kind of forced. Clowns are in some ways like a sort of sick parody of happiness. It's like they look happy, but almost like they've just been forced to be happy all the time, which actually sounds really, really miserable and terrible. It's the whole thing if you were forced to eat your favourite food for the rest of time, it would actually be torture. There's just some misery wrapped up in the clowns. Joseph Grimlardi was a famous clown in the Victorian times, and he died of alcoholism. And Charles Dickens wrote up his memoirs, including the fantastically bleak quote, "I'm grim all day, yet I make you laugh all night." So there's something unsettling about clowns in the way that they're forced to be happy all the time. Peter Sellers is another good example of a man who was very much a clown. He didn't wear makeup and stuff, but he was, clowned around in comedy films, but was clearly a depressive, very miserable person underneath it all.
I mean, to move from clowns who have been slightly discredited as happy presences in pop culture to, stand-up comedians who we actually do sincerely think, I'll go and see a stand-up comedian, that might make me happy. A lot of stand-up comedians famously aren't that happy.
Yeah, there's something about being in touch with happiness makes you sad, or trying to perform happiness makes you sad.
Yeah, the elements of, going up there and forcing a performance of happiness in front of people who could... I'm sure stand-up comedy isn't just a life of tragic, tearful drudgery. There are a couple of people who've done stand-up who might listen to this podcast who I'm sure could tell us either way. I'm sure there are times when, you're up there, you've connected with the audience and it's actually nice. But I suspect there are just as many times where half the audience are on their phones or throwing their glass bottles at you. The need to stay cheerful in front of all that must be a harsh time.
I guess it's kind of the grim reality of what it's like to be an entertainer or someone, especially say with stand-up comedians, similar to being a clown. Some of it is you kind of embarrass yourself publicly for other people's entertainment. There's something grim, obviously that's where I think the clowning thing and court jesters come from, someone who'd react ridiculous or act the fool so people can laugh at them. And you get that in stand-up comedy today. People they'll tell humiliating, embarrassing stories about themselves. They may have just been made up, I guess, for comedic purposes. They may have some grain of truth in them. But yeah, there's an element of someone prostrating and kind of humiliating themselves for your, enjoyment. And part of it is making yourself feel superior to the person, which is kind of what makes it funny. And there's also something I think there's a bit unsettling about that. We don't necessarily always like to be made to feel superior. And I think that's why, especially some people find cringe humor unbearable because they don't like the way that they're made to feel kind of superior to the awful things that's happening to the character. And I think that's one of the reasons why clowns are a bit unsettling and scary, because if this person's kind of debasing themselves for your amusement, there is something that feels uncomfortable about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the idea of actually relating to the clown and thinking, what would it be like if that were me, which is, I don't know, is that different from clowns as a terrifying inhuman presence? I don't really know. I mean, I've read an article by former podcast guest Chris Brosnahan about why we are scared of clowns, which I will attempt to remember to link in the show notes, which he said, I think, sort of as you said earlier, that it's a combination of the horrible flat death mask type thing, the sort of mockery of human expression, and the idea that in a lot of cases, in clowning, or in sitting in the front row in modern stand-up comedy, the clown can sort of come at you and humiliate you, I mean, clowns might be vaguely funny, but a lot of the time it's a type of comedy that might sort of drag you in and expect you to sort of laugh along with your own humiliation, which I'm sure is, based on the fact that it's actually happening to you, is probably even worse than feeling a bit uncomfortable about the clown being humiliated.
Yeah, there's definitely that. Clowns themselves, with the masks and the makeup and everything, there's also just, I guess, there's something quite uncanny about them, how they kind of look familiar like humans, but they have enlarged, feet or like a giant painted on smile. There's something about Freud's ideas of the uncanny in there, in that they kind of look normal, but are sort of like a distortion of normality. I mean,
pop culturally, I guess clowns, I'm told by the Wikipedia entry on evil clowns, but the evil clown that started it all was indeed Pennywise in the original It in the 80s, which seems to be giving slightly short shrift to the poor Joker, who'd been around for even longer. And again, as Chris Brosnahan's article points out, there's also Mr. Punch and The Man Who Laughs from old silent movies, who have been around for even longer than that.
The original It film, I think one of the reasons why the sort of scary clown registered so well with the public at the time was, I think, because it was harking back to a real-life murderous clown. It's interesting, because I think a lot of the fear of clowns come from John Wayne Gacy, American serial killer who tortured and murdered 33 men and boys over 6 years. And he also used to dress as a character he invented called Pogo the Clown for fundraising events and parades and things like that. So I think a lot of the kind of pop culture meme of a scary sort of murderous clown comes from the real-life case of a real-life killer clown.
But obviously at this point, as you say, it's gone beyond that and become a meme. A lot of people are seeing this film this weekend and going, it's a clown, I'm scared, or it's a clown, I'm unsettled, or whatever. I wouldn't suspect the percentage who know who John Wayne Gacy is necessarily that high.
No, you don't have to be aware of him, but that's kind of where the idea sort of spread. It's like patient zero for scary killer clowns.
Well, the Joker really is getting short shrift. He's been around longer than It or John Wayne Gacy, but unfortunately he wasn't in a movie till the late 80s, so...
Yeah.
And the version in that 60s Adam West Batman show was perhaps a bit more silly than terrifying.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good description of all the Adam West Batman. More silly than terrifying.
Well, the Joker isn't as much of a clown as he used to be, They've downplayed his silly party trick balloons or, lapel flowers shooting poison in favour of slightly more, he's just a serial killer or he's just a mobster. The fact that he's still wearing clown makeup is basically a bit of a fun affectation at this point.
There is, I think, something, though, the Joker really kind of does capture our fear of clowns, even without the, like you say, all the kind of clown paraphernalia that they may have ditched a bit. I mean, I think probably the Joker is certainly more believable in this, especially in the Christopher Nolan sort of Batman film things going on, if he doesn't have, explosive balloons and stuff, because does come across as a little bit ridiculous. But what I think one of the reasons why people find clowns scary, which the Joker really does sum up, is that clowns are unpredictable. They behave in sort of unusual and strange ways, and people don't like that. And obviously that very much is right at the core of the Joker's character, especially the kind of side of the Joker that's like an agent of chaos, the sort of side of the Joker they brought out in The Dark Knight. Yeah, kind of over-the-top figure who's unpredictable and can obviously be unpredictable and dangerous, which the Joker really gets.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess if you wanted to really extrapolate the clowns everywhere, a lot of, like, movie villains are very big on that sort of, he's smiling, he's friendly, oh shit, he stabbed you, and now he's smiling, he's friendly, he's made a joke, oh, he's beaten you up. There's sort of this sort of big, charismatic, talking, smiling, joking, sudden burst of violence, talking, smiling, joking, smiling killer thing is a very sort of big movie standard. You know, if you get a big actor to play a part like that and you write it in a way that isn't comically incompetent, you know, that actor will probably come away with a bit of an iconic performance on their hands. It's a big sort of smiling, happy, enjoying being evil villain thing. And again, I don't think people are writing that thinking, I am writing a clown. But in some ways they kind of are. Yeah.
Because, like I say, they're tapping into that, what is quite sort of innate about the clown, the unpredictability. And also, unpredictability is very much tied up, and I think, in probably the world's most dangerous clown, and that's Donald Trump, firmly confirming that clowns are scary in 2017 because we have a clown who's in charge of launching nuclear missiles. And, you know, who acts unpredictably, maybe someone we make fun of, but is also deeply terrifying.
Yeah, or on the other side of the argument, we're still clearly scared of clowns, including supervillains, the Joker and Donald Trump, and yet the announcement of like 3 Joker movies in the last few weeks has mostly been met with a big collective eye roll. But I don't know if that's exhaustion with clowns or just exhaustion with that particular clown, a general desire for DC Comics to stop pumping that clown.
I don't know, I think also the collective shrug aimed at the announcement of new Joker films is probably the fact that Suicide Squad wasn't very good, and I don't think Jared Leto particularly excelled in the role in Suicide Squad. I mean, it's difficult to play a part just after Heath Ledger did that iconic performance, but I think a lot of people sort of looked at that and said, like, we don't really want more Jared Leto Joker, please.
Yeah, that was bad clowning. Yeah. Jared Leto, bad clowning. Okay, and that was the first episode of New Look Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you for listening, and, you know, do let us know if you thought this is better, worse, the same. You know, we value your feedback. We did a survey recently and everything, although there's no money this time, so... But anyway, yes, you can find more from us at moderatefantasyviolence.com, including deleted scenes, the occasional this and piece, and an about page. There's also an about page. Or you can go to iTunes and probably other podcast hosts as well and leave us some kind of review telling us how much you love the show.
You can also find us on Twitter, where we are at MFV Podcast. You can also find us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence and clicking on our lovely purple logo when it appears. I've been Alastair Ball. If you want more of my writing, you can follow me on Twitter at AlastairJRBall, or you can go to my website, redtrainblog.com.
I've been Nick Bryan. You can find more from me at nickbryan.com, and you can follow me on Twitter as @NickMB. Okay, and thank you very much for listening. As I said about a minute ago, I hope you enjoyed it, and yes, we'll be back in 2 weeks with our second New Look episode, in which we will be covering the odd-looking new film Mother from Darren Aronofsky, and discussing some other related issue that we'll probably settle on in the pub afterwards. Okay, thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye.
At this point, we don't need to recommend shit to each other. We just need to do a wrap up and say next time we're doing Mother.
Yes, cool. So we're down for that, because I'm down for that. If you're down for that,
Yep. Nothing gives me more pleasure than using the phrase "next time we're doing Mother." But...
Next time your mother. Oh no, sorry, just Mother, not your mother.
Your mum.
Cool.